Billionaire disrespects black air hostess in airplane. What happened when he know the truth? What if the woman you belittled at 30,000 feet was the one holding your empire's fate in her hands? James Miller was not a man accustomed to discomfort. At 47, he'd built an empire. Miller Enterprises, a conglomerate of tech startups, real estate ventures, and private equity deals that had made him a billionaire by 35. His life was a carefully curated machine. Private jets, penthouse suites, and a team of assistants who anticipated his every need. So when he boarded his Gulfstream G650 for the 6-hour flight from New York to Los Angeles, he expected perfection. The seat, a custom leather recliner, felt slightly off, too firm, perhaps, or not reclined enough. The champagne was a degree too warm. And the flight attendant, a young woman named Jasmine Carter, hadn't anticipated his request for a specific brand of sparkling water. "Excuse me," James snapped, his voice carrying the weight of a man who knew his words could move mountains. "Is it too much to ask for competent service on a jet that costs more than your annual salary?" Jasmine, 28, stood at the edge of his seat, her hands clasped professionally in front of her. Her uniform was impeccable, her hair pulled back in a neat bun, and her eyes, dark and expressive, betrayed no hint of the sting his words carried. "I apologize, Mr. Miller," she said evenly. "I'll bring you the Perrier you requested right away." Her calm only fueled his irritation. He leaned forward, his Rolex glinting under the cabin lights. "You know, for someone in the service industry, you're remarkably slow. Do they even train people like you for jobs like this?" The words hung in the air, sharp and deliberate. The other passengers, two of James's business associates and a junior assistant, shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but no one spoke. Jasmine's jaw tightened, but she nodded. "I'll ensure everything meets your standards, sir." As she turned to fetch the water, James muttered under his breath, just loud enough for her to hear, "Doubtful." Jasmine Carter was no stranger to men like James Miller. Growing up in Englewood, one of Chicago's toughest neighborhoods, she'd faced worse than snide remarks from entitled billionaires. Her mother, Elaine, had been a single parent, working 2 jobs as a nurse's aide to keep food on the table. Elaine's mantra had been simple: "The world will try to break you, Jasmine. Don't let it." That lesson had carried Jasmine through a childhood marked by poverty, violence, and the kind of systemic barriers that seemed designed to keep people like her from rising. But rise she did. At 16, she'd earned a scholarship to a private high school. At 22, she graduated from college with honors. Now, at 28, she was balancing her job as a flight attendant with night classes at UCLA's law school, determined to become a civil rights attorney. The private jet gig was a side hustle, a way to pay for textbooks and rent while she studied. She'd taken it because the pay was good and the hours were flexible. But men like James Miller made it feel like a battlefield. As she poured the Perrier into a crystal glass, Jasmine caught her reflection in the galley's polished steel. Her mother's eyes stared back at her, eyes that had seen too much but never stopped dreaming. She touched the small tattoo on her wrist, a simple Scales of Justice symbol, faded but still clear. It was her mother's last gift to her, inked just before Elaine's death from cancer 3 years ago. "Keep fighting for what's right," Elaine had whispered. Jasmine carried that promise with her every day. The flight was only an hour in, and James's mood hadn't improved. He'd already sent back a plate of seared scallops, complaining they were overcooked, and demanded a new laptop charger when his wouldn't connect to the jet's power system. Each request came with a barbed comment, each one aimed at Jasmine. "Do you even know how to do your job?" he asked when she brought him the wrong brand of coffee. "Or is this just a diversity hire gone wrong?" The words hit like a slap, but Jasmine's face remained a mask of professionalism. She'd heard variations of this before, on other flights, in college, even as a kid in Englewood. The racism wasn't always overt, but it was always there, lurking in the subtext of, "You don't belong here." The sexism was just as familiar, the assumption that she was less capable because of her gender. She swallowed the hurt, as she always did, and replaced the coffee with a smile. James's business associates, Tom and Rachel, exchanged glances but said nothing. Tom, a balding man in his 50s, pretended to focus on his tablet. Rachel, a sharp-eyed VP in her 30s, looked like she wanted to intervene but thought better of it. James's assistant, a nervous young man named Ethan, fidgeted in his seat, avoiding eye contact. Jasmine moved through the cabin, checking on the other passengers. Rachel whispered, "I'm sorry about him. He's intense." Jasmine nodded, her smile tight. "It's fine. I've got this." But James wasn't done. When Jasmine passed by his seat to collect empty glasses, he leaned back and said, "You know, I could buy this airline and fire you myself if I wanted to. Maybe I should." Jasmine paused, her hand steady on the tray. "I'm sure you could, Mr. Miller," she said softly. "But I'm here to do my job, not to play games with power." Her response caught him off guard. For a moment, his eyes narrowed, as if trying to decipher whether she was mocking him. Then he smirked. "Bold. I'll give you that. But boldness doesn't pay the bills, sweetheart." The condescension in his tone made her fingers tighten around the tray, but she kept moving. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her crack. 2 hours into the flight, the plane hit a patch of turbulence. It started as a gentle shudder, barely noticeable, but within seconds, the cabin was shaking violently. Glasses rattled in the galley, and a low rumble filled the air. The seatbelt sign pinged on, and the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've hit some unexpected turbulence. Please remain seated and fasten your seatbelts." James, who'd been typing furiously on his laptop, slammed it shut. "Great. Just what I needed," he muttered. His irritation was palpable, as if the weather itself was a personal affront. Tom gripped his armrests, his face pale. Rachel's eyes darted to the window, where clouds churned in the darkness. Ethan, the assistant, looked like he might be sick. The other flight attendant, a nervous rookie named Sarah, froze in the galley, unsure of what to do. Jasmine, however, sprang into action. She moved through the cabin with calm authority, checking seatbelts and offering reassurances. "It's just a rough patch," she said to Rachel, who nodded gratefully. "We'll be through it soon." When she reached James, he was glaring out the window, his knuckles white. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "Do you people even know how to fly a plane?" Jasmine ignored the jab. "Mr. Miller, please keep your seatbelt fastened. I'm here to make sure you're safe." He scoffed but didn't argue. As the turbulence worsened, a loud bang echoed from the galley, and Sarah let out a small yelp. Jasmine was there in an instant, helping her secure loose items. "Breathe," she told Sarah. "We've got this." Her composure was a lifeline for the cabin. Even James, for all his bluster, watched her move with a quiet efficiency that was impossible to ignore. The turbulence lasted 10 agonizing minutes, but Jasmine's presence kept panic at bay. When the plane finally steadied, the passengers exhaled collectively, and Sarah gave Jasmine a grateful look. As the flight settled into a quieter rhythm, Jasmine made her rounds again, ensuring everyone was comfortable. When she reached James's seat, he was staring at his phone, his expression unreadable. She noticed his water glass was empty and offered to refill it. "I'm fine," he said curtly, but his tone lacked its earlier venom. He glanced at her wrist, where the scales of justice tattoo peeked out from under her sleeve. "What's that?" he asked, almost reluctantly. Jasmine hesitated. She didn't owe him an explanation, but something in his voice, less hostile, more curious, made her answer. "It's for my mother," she said. "She passed away a few years ago. She always told me to fight for what's right, no matter how hard it gets." James's eyes flicked to hers, searching for something. For the first time, he seemed to see her, not as a faceless servant, but as a person with a story. "Sounds like she was a tough woman," he said, almost grudgingly. "She was," Jasmine replied. "She had to be." The moment passed, and James returned to his phone, but something had shifted. The rest of the flight was uneventful, and when the plane landed in Los Angeles, James didn't say another word to her. As he disembarked, he gave her a curt nod. Nothing more, but it was more than she'd expected. 3 weeks later, James sat in the boardroom of Miller Enterprises' Manhattan headquarters, his legal team briefing him on a high-stakes lawsuit. The company was facing allegations of labor rights violations, underpaid workers, unsafe conditions, and discriminatory practices at one of its manufacturing subsidiaries. The case was gaining traction, with a young attorney from a pro bono firm leading the charge. Her name was Jasmine Carter. James froze when he heard it. Jasmine Carter, he repeated, his voice tight. Describe her. The lead attorney, a man named Greg, raised an eyebrow. Late 20s, black, sharp as a tack. She's been relentless, digging up evidence, rallying plaintiffs. She's good, James. Too good. James's mind raced back to the flight. The flight attendant. The tattoo. The quiet strength that had irritated him so much. It couldn't be the same woman. But when Greg pulled up a photo from the law firm's website, there she was, Jasmine Carter, in a tailored blazer, her eyes as steady as they'd been on the plane. The realization hit him like a freight train. He'd spent hours belittling a woman who was now holding his company's fate in her hands. The lawsuit wasn't just a legal battle, it was personal. Jasmine had been working the flight as a side job, likely to fund her legal work. And he'd treated her like she was nothing. James couldn't shake the guilt. It gnawed at him through sleepless nights and tense board meetings. He'd built his empire on ruthlessness, but this felt different. Jasmine wasn't just a flight attendant or even just a lawyer. She was someone who'd faced the kind of odds he could barely comprehend and still came out swinging. He'd misjudged her, and it stung. He tracked her down through the law firm and requested a meeting. To his surprise, she agreed. They met at a small coffee shop in downtown LA, far from the gleaming boardrooms he was used to. Jasmine sat across from him, her posture relaxed but her eyes sharp. She wasn't the deferential flight attendant anymore. She was in her element, a lawyer who knew her worth. I owe you an apology, James said, his voice low. I was out of line on that flight. I didn't know who you were, but that's no excuse. I was wrong. Jasmine studied him, her expression unreadable. You didn't just disrespect me, Mr. Miller. You disrespected every person who's ever had to fight to be seen as more than their job or their skin color. Her words cut deeper than he'd expected. He nodded, swallowing hard. I know. And I'm sorry. She leaned forward, her voice steady. Apologies are easy. Actions are harder. If you mean it, prove it. What do you want? He asked. Jasmine didn't hesitate. I want you to fund a scholarship program for disadvantaged students who want to go to law school. Kids like me, who don't have the connections or the money but have the drive. Do that, and we're square. James was stunned. He'd expected a demand for money, a settlement, or even a public apology. But this was bigger than him. It was a chance to do something that mattered. 6 months later, the Miller Carter Scholarship Fund launched with a $10 million endowment from James's personal fortune. The program targeted students from underserved communities, offering full rides to law school and mentorship from practicing attorneys. Jasmine oversaw the selection process, ensuring the funds went to those who needed them most. The lawsuit against Miller Enterprises settled out of court, with Jasmine securing better wages and conditions for the workers. James didn't fight it. He knew she'd won, not just legally but morally. Their partnership grew beyond the scholarship. James invited Jasmine to consult on Miller Enterprises' diversity and inclusion initiatives, and she brought a perspective he'd never considered. For the first time, he saw his wealth as a tool for change, not just power. Jasmine never forgot the flight, but she didn't let it define her. She graduated from law school at the top of her class and opened a small practice focused on labor and civil rights. The scales of justice tattoo on her wrist remained a quiet reminder of her mother's words, "Fight for what's right." As for James, he never forgot the woman who'd shown him what true strength looked like. He still flew private jets, but he never again treated a flight attendant, or anyone else, as less than human. Jasmine had changed him, not with anger or retribution, but with the quiet power of her resilience. On a crisp spring morning, Jasmine stood at the podium of the first Miller Carter Scholarship Gala, addressing a room full of donors, students, and advocates. James sat in the audience, watching her speak with the same calm authority she'd shown on that turbulent flight. She thanked the donors, but her eyes lingered on him for a moment, a silent acknowledgement of the unlikely path they'd walked together. "The world will try to break you," she said, echoing her mother's words. "But it's not about where you start, it's about where you choose to go." The room erupted in applause, and James felt something he hadn't in years. Pride, not in himself, but in someone else. For the first time, he understood what it meant to build something that lasted.